Kicking off at number 5, an ancient Greek haunting. And this tale is just straight up awesome and may in fact be one of the earliest known recordings of a ghost story in European history. And it's a tale told by the legendary Roman author and politician Pliny the Younger way back when in 72 AD. And it concerns a particular haunted house in the Greek capital of Athens. In the city there was a large attractive house that had remained a mystery to the local people as to when and where it had been built, and thus garnered a disturbing reputation. At night, anyone sleeping inside the building heard strange groans and creaks, and sometimes in the dead of night came the rattling of chains. Because of its reputation, it had changed hands through a string of owners. No one wanted to be afflicted by its paranormal goings on. So came a Greek philosopher named Athenodorus, a highly rational man that didn't believe in ghosts and could spot a bargain at the same time. Despite the warnings and the house's terrible reputation, he brought the house for a fraction of the price and moved on in. On his first night there, after an evening of drinking and reading, he of course began to hear the strange sounds of the restless spirit, and after a while Athenodorus looked up to see an emaciated old man peering straight at him with chains bound across his wrists, violent wounds across his body. Undeterred, Athenodorus realized that the ghost wanted him to follow him, and so he did. It led him to the house's garden, where suddenly it stopped and the chains shattered to the floor and dissolved in front of his very eyes. As the legend goes, the next morning Athenodorus ordered a few men to dig up the garden, and in exactly the same spot that the spirit had led him the previous night was the skeleton of a man, still with chains bound around his wrists. Athenodorus arranged for the skeleton to be buried in the conventional way, and from that day forth the spirit was never seen again. Wow. That's one way to do it, right? Coming in next at number 4, the lady with the goat feet. And we're continuing this series with a tale from that mysterious place known only as Portugal. Now, the history of Portuguese culture is just straight up fascinating either way. The oldest state on the whole of the Iberian Peninsula, and perhaps one of the oldest in the whole of Europe, with a rich history of the Carthaginians, Romans, Celts and Moors. And because of that, Portuguese folklore history is ripe with a little bit of everything. As the legend goes for this one, first compiled in the Lendas e Narrativas by Alexandre Herculano, a Portuguese lord by the name of Don Diogo Lopes was hunting in his lands when he ran across the most beautiful lady that he had ever seen singing out in the field. Instantly he fell in love and promised her all the riches in the world if she married him. She accepted, but with one condition: he could never make the sign of the cross again. As Herculano goes on to portray, it was only when Don Diogo returned with his new bride that he realized there was something different about her. You see, she had forked feet in the fashion of a goat. Hooves. Not one to be deterred, Don Diogo shrugged his shoulders, and the pair lived in happiness for many, many years, where they had 2 beautiful children, Inigo Guerra and Dona Sol. One day though, after Don Diogo had returned from a successful hunt, he awarded his prize hound with a bone, but his wife's dog, a large black demonic looking hound, burst into a fit of jealous hunger and ripped apart Don Diogo's dog in a violent rage. Shocked by such incredible evil and gore, Don Diogo blessed himself with the sign of the cross, and in that moment his wife, the lady with the goat feet, let out a hypnotic screech, screamed and floated into the air. And then her young daughter, Dona Sol, did the same, and the 2 women were never seen again. Now obviously there is a lot of allegory of religious tones to this story in particular, but it does pose the interesting question, where the hell is this story's origin rooted?
Number 3 on this list is the Cullin Moore. The Cullin Moore acted as the site for one of Scotland's most infamous and bloody battles in all of history. Christy McIntyre writes, "Many of the ancient battlefields of Scotland are rumored to be plagued by the souls of those who died there. It's not surprising that Culloden, the site one of the most infamous battles in British history, is among them. Over in under an hour, nearly 1,500 Jacobite soldiers were killed, and it remains the last battle fought on British soil. But according to some locals, the battle still rages. Gunfire, swords, and crying are said to echo across the empty moor, particularly on the anniversary of the battle. As well as sounds of combat, the figure of a lone Jacobite soldier reportedly roams the battlefield, wandering in his clan tartan, muttering 'defeated' over and over again as he goes. He's not the only ghostly visitor to this site. Close to the battlefield is the house that Bonnie Prince Charlie, leader of the Jacobite rebellion, slept in the night before the battle. Although now a hotel, it's said that the prince still lingers there wearing full Highland dress, waiting for the battle that will restore him to the throne. Birds are said to never sing or even fly over this area since they can sense the horrible spirits that are still around here. Whenever birds or animals in general want to avoid a certain area, usually it makes me pretty skeptical as well. Animals have a sixth sense about such things and they can feel danger before it's even there. Also, if I'm to avoid any ghosts, then it's always going to be the ones that were slain in battle. These souls have been through hell and are obviously very dangerous. Our soldier could wander around saying defeated, or he could pull out his ghost sword and go to town on you. Not a risk that I am personally willing to take. Number 2 on this list is Overton Bridge. I'm sorry, but this bridge is clearly haunted. Is actually the title of an article written by Amanda Arnold on how freaking haunted this bridge actually is. The bridge is located in the small Scottish town of Dumbarton. Most bridges that we talk about on this channel are haunted by the ghosts of those who have passed away here, or some lady in white that longs for her lover here, or something like that. Not this one though. This bridge actually isn't dangerous at all to humans. It is, however, super dangerous to our best friends. Dogs. Apparently this one little bridge in basically the middle of nowhere has been the host to over 50 dogs taking their own life. Yeah, you heard that properly, a dog taking their own life. In the past 60 years, anywhere from 300 to 600 dogs have thrown themselves over the bridge for no apparent reason, and over 50 of them have died from the fall. Think about that statistic for a second. Like, that's actually kind of crazy. Outsiders believe that there has to be some kind of smell or some property around here that attracts the dogs to the water, but locals believe it's something paranormal. Apparently, even though these spirits are not dangerous to humans, we can still sense them, and people around here have sensed these beings before. It also doesn't seem like a smell that bothers these dogs because they go into a deep trance right before they leap off. At first, she froze, McKinnon told the Times, but then she became possessed by a strange energy and ran and jumped right off the parapet. That was a statement from a dog owner who watched as their dog jumped off the bridge. Locals think that the ghost who is causing these doggy disturbances are from the Lady of Overton. She died here many years ago mourning her husband. I suppose this could be the case, but why is she taking out her grief on dogs? Like, come on lady, let's leave the pups out of this. Anyways, this is definitely a haunted spot, and if you do happen to be walking your dog here, then keep it on a leash. Number 1 on this list is Codor Castle. Codor Castle is definitely one of the most haunted castles in Europe. It is quite a name for itself because it has a strong connection to one of the most successful stories ever written, Macbeth. This also adds to the lore of this castle's haunting because Macbeth, or the Scottish play, has its own history of haunting surrounding it. Even though this castle is deeply tied in with that story, its haunting doesn't share any connection to the one that plagues Macbeth. This one is centered around the ghost of a woman named Muriel Calder. Muriel Calder was the daughter of the Earl of Calder, who was in charge of the castle in the 18th century. Her ghost is seen at this castle all the time, with most of the sightings taking place in the tallest tower here. There are 2 stories of origin for how she managed to come about, and no one is 100% sure which is the correct one. The first story talks about how she fell in love with someone from a rival clan. A real Romeo and Juliet story where she was deeply in love with someone that she wasn't allowed to see. She would sneak out to see this boy, but eventually her father caught her and punished her for her actions. After learning of her treachery, his rage knew no bounds and he beat his daughter. She got away though and ran to the top of the tower, locking the door behind her. Her father wasn't deterred though and broke through, drawing his sword in the process. She tried climbing out the window to safety, but her dad, with one big swing, cut both of her hands off and she fell to her death. The second story doesn't include the dramatic chase up to the tower, but says that he just cut her hands off as punishment so that she could never hold her lover again. Obviously though, with both of her hands sliced off, she couldn't really do much of anything and died from blood loss soon after. Either way, her ghost is now forever restless in this castle and makes itself regularly known to visitors. Obviously, the key identifier of this apparition It's her lack of two hands.
In at number 5 we have Delphis Cave. Delphis Cave is one of the most famous and well-known haunted caves in the world, and tourists and locals visit often to try and come in contact with the paranormal spirits that haunt the cave. It's located in Penteli, a mountain to the north of Athens, Greece, and has been around since the 5th century. Back then it was used as a marble quarry by the builders of the Acropolis, and the cave was actually discovered by accident during work for the extraction of marble. During the Middle Ages it was used by Orthodox Christian hermits, and later on a small church was built at the entrance of the cave, featuring an unusual double layout, one part devoted to Saint Spiridon and one to Saint Nicholas. It was used as a place of worship for the followers of Pan and the nymphs. It is also believed to have been, and still could possibly be, used by other religious groups, mainly occultists. The cave got its name from a belief that an infamous 19th century thief and robber named Delphis used the cave as a hideout, and legend has it that he hid his treasures inside the cave, and over the years many people have come to try and find his fortune. Many times throughout history the cave has been used as a shelter for civilians, and in 1977 construction work started on the cave, and it's unclear who was behind it. Many believe it might have been the works of the government wanting to use the cave and surrounding areas for the US and Greek army. The cave has been associated with various paranormal activity and ghost sightings since the ancient times, this being the main reason it's being used for a place of worship. The mystical character of the cave continues to fascinate people to this day, and dozens of urban legends are connected to the cave. There are numerous tales of people experiencing strange and abnormal activity that has taken place in and around the cave. Stories tell of electronics that stop working, water flowing the wrong way, and disappearances of explorers who enter the cave to never emerge again. Also, details such as a small handprint near the entrance furthers the mystery of this place. In at number 4, the Necromanteion. The Necromanteion was an ancient Greek temple built and dedicated to the god and goddess of the underworld. The Necromanteion was an ancient Greek temple built and dedicated to the god and goddess of the underworld, Hades and Persephone. According to tradition, it was located on the banks of Acheron River in Epirus, near the ancient city of Ephria. This site was believed to be the door to Hades, the realm of the dead. The word Necromanteion means oracle of the dead, and the faithful came here to talk to their dead ancestors. Other temples were known to house oracles of the dead, but the Necromanteion of Ephria was the most important. It belonged to the Thesprotians, the local Epirot Greek tribe, and they would participate in rituals involving elaborate ceremonies where they would seek to speak to the dead. The people would eat specific foods like pork, bread and oysters, said to cleanse the body, and would proceed to sacrifice a sheep, and the faithful would descend through a series of meandering corridors, leaving offerings to the people as they passed through the iron gates. The celebrants would then witness the priest arise from the floor and fly throughout the temple, said to be possessed by the souls of the dead. The Necromanteion was also described as the entrance by which Odysseus made his Nekia, which is the ancient Greek cult practice and is a rite by which ghosts were called up by the Greeks and questioned about the future. This temple was believed by many to be the final resting spot. Once they passed on and their bodies decayed into the earth, their spirits were released, and the Necromanteion was the final resting place for the dead. Many locals and tourists come to try and communicate with the dead. There is an abundance of paranormal activity in this place, and it is known as an entryway to the underworld, and is one of the only direct channels on Earth for the souls of the underworld to come and communicate with humans.
Next up at number 3, Bishop Thietmar of Merseburg. And outside of everything else, this guy in particular was an incredibly interesting individual and an important chronicler of the ancient kings and Holy Roman emperors of Europe. He was born of royalty, but only ever as a prince, and so he made a life documenting the comings and goings of the kingdoms. Because of that, he also came across some pretty bizarre paranormal occurrences, and this one is perhaps his best. As Thietmar was informed by his niece, the Abbess Brigadia, a priest had been given proceedings of an ancient church in Utrecht that had fallen into disrepair but had recently been renewed and consecrated by the local bishop. One day at dawn, the priest saw what he could only describe as dead people making offerings in the cemetery and the church, and could also hear them singing in the pulpits. Disturbed, he asked the bishop, a man named Baldric, what he should do, and much to his dismay, he was ordered to sleep throughout the night in the church so that he could wrestle it back from the dead. But on the following night, both he and his bedding were thrown out into the cold by a supernatural force. Obviously at this point he was terrified, and so he complained again to the bishop. Again though, after being blessed with saintly relics and sprinkled with holy water, he was continued with guarding his newly consecrated church and ordered not to leave until the dead had been put to rest. But after not sleeping a wink, wide-eyed in terror, just before dawn rolled back around again, suddenly the dead lifted up the priest's body, placed him before the church's altar, and burned his body to a fine ash. The bishop, after hearing the news and confused by the matter, ordered the whole town to penance with a 3-day fast so that he could aid the souls of the departed. In his final writings, Bishop Thear stated in this case, "As the day to the living, so the night is conceded to the dead." Swinging in next at number 2, Aniceto. And this story is weirdly terrifying, if not one of the most unfortunate cases in European history that would perhaps put Henry VIII to shame. And it involves a German prince named Joachim II and his favourite hunting lodge, the Jagdschloss Grundelwald, the oldest preserved castle in Berlin. Now Joachim loved hunting so much that he'd regularly throw 3-day-long festivals to celebrate the thrill of the hunt, and Grunwald soon became his go-to spot, where he'd hide away from the responsibilities of rulership. In fact, he was so smitten by the place that he allowed his mistress, Aniceto, to live there in secrecy, much to the dismay of his second wife, Hedwig, daughter of the Polish king Sigismund I. Now obviously things were a little bit awkward, but in an attempt to win her husband's favour, Hedwig decided to tag along with his thrill for hunting, and so Anna in this respect was often sent away to avoid any confrontation. But during one particular stay in the lodge in the year 1551, the rotten floor beneath Hedwig and Joachim collapsed and broke away. Joachim was incredibly lucky and landed between the beams without any injury, but his wife Hedwig wasn't so lucky, and she plunged through the depths. She shattered her thigh on the rafters, and then, if that wasn't already enough misfortune, she impaled herself on a set of hanging antlers that were on display in the room below. Hunting. You see, Hedwig survived, but in horrific physical health. And what did Joachim do? Of course, he eschewed his wife's needs and headed back to Aniceto so he could carry on the hunt. The thing is though, Joachim and Hedwig had a son, Johann, who grew up throughout this whole ordeal with a burning hatred for Aniceto. Eventually, Joachim grew ill and passed away, but on his deathbed, he made his son Johann promise that he'd look after the one woman that he'd always loved. And no, not his mother Hedwig, but instead Aniceto. As his father died, Johann promised that he would, but the next day he instead ordered his men to capture Anna, where he imprisoned her in the Spandau Fortress of Germany, and by imprisonment I mean that Johann walled her in alive beneath a small staircase in the western wing of the castle, where she presumably starved to death and died, and now haunts the spot for all eternity. Yeah. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the tale of the Hun Press. Now, as it's become apparent throughout this video, European history is rife with bizarre, terrifying and mysterious tales, but perhaps none of them are so clearly perfect to be a horror film than the tale of the Hun Press, as written in the 1198 record of English history from William of Newburgh, A History of English Affairs. As the tale goes, there was once a chaplain who wasn't exactly the holiest of men. He drank, he feasted, and he of course loved to hunt. Because of this, he earned the nickname the Hun Press, the dog priest. Eventually he died and was buried as a holy man in the monastery of Melrose, but it's seen that even death couldn't stop the Hun Press. On many nights his corpse would rise from its grave and wander the town, where one night it came across a woman that he'd had relations with when he was alive. Obviously the undead skeletal fiend was still smitten with her and made its way to her bedchambers. Obviously the Hun Press was chased back to its grave, but that didn't stop it, and the lady soon became plagued by the ghoul every single night. She was unable to deter the undead chaplain and had soon become quite the terrifying problem. Distraught, she enlisted the help of a young friar and a few other men to somehow put an end to the Hun Press. You see, that very night the friar camped out at the cemetery, and when midnight struck, the other men who'd accompanied him had given up, given the fact that it was a cold and damp evening. But as soon as they wandered off, the Hun Press had risen from its grave, set about to attack the friar in all its undead gore, ripping at the young man with his bones and claws. Somehow though, the young friar had a burst of courage and attacked the Hun Press with his axe, striking it hard deep into its body. And it worked, and the Hun Press fled back to its tomb, sealed back for the night. But the friar wasn't done with it just yet, and as dawn rose, him and his men opened the tomb of the Hun Press to find the exact spot where the friar had had wounded him, seeping with a vile black sludge flowing with undead gore from the sepulchre. As William of Newburgh later noted, the men took one look at the Hun Press and burned the body to ash, where they scattered him to the winds. And that's from a history book, guys, from 1198.
Coming in at number 5, we have Balgal Castle. The Balgal Castle is said to be one of the most haunted places in Ireland and is haunted by many different ghosts. The haunted castle is in the village of Balgal in Northern Ireland and overlooks the sea at the head of Balgal Bay. The castle was built in 1625 by James Shaw of Scotland, but now is run as a hotel. The most well-known ghost is that of Lady Isabella Shaw, or nicknamed the Ghost of Balgal. Legend has it that her husband Lord James locked her away in a tower where she was supposedly pushed to her death. She is said to roam the halls of the castle looking for her child, who was taken away from her at birth from her cruel husband, Lord James. Many people who stay in the castle say that they are woken up throughout the night due to her knocking on their bedroom doors. The tourists often climb the spiral staircase to view the ghost room where Lady Isabella lived out her final days. In 2003, one of the managers of the hotel, Olga Henry, was once a skeptic of ghosts and paranormal activity. But after spending some time working at the hotel, she stated that she believes there is definitely something in the hotel. According to Olga, one guest was staying in one of the rooms in the tower beneath the popular ghost room, and in the middle of the night he had awoken suddenly, believing he was at home and one of his children had laid a hand on his back. He woke up and said that he could hear a child running around the room and laughing, but he couldn't see anyone around, so he ran out of the room and into the lobby. He was so terrified from what he had experienced and checked out right away and never returned to the hotel again. In December of 2003, Olga was setting up the dungeon room in the tower for guests arriving for a meal. She set up the tables neatly, then locked the room before leaving. Just before the guests were set to arrive, she went back into the room and the tables were now a mess with unfolded napkins and glasses with an unusual scum around them, and were now arranged in a circle on the table. Several paranormal investigators and mediums have come to the castle to investigate over the years. A group of mediums that spent the night at the hotel had reported that they had detected more ghosts than there were guests staying at the hotel at the time. In at number 4, we have Liamonay Castle. Liamonay Castle has an extremely sinister history and is haunted by a woman known as the Red Mary. This castle was originally a basic 5-story Irish tower house which was built around 1480 by a member of the O'Brien family, who were one of the last of the High Kings of Ireland and a direct descendant of Brian Boru. In 1639, Conor O'Brien married a woman named Mary Ní Mahone, and she became one of the most famous women in Irish folklore who, due to her flaming red hair, was commonly known as Red Mary. She was born in 1615 and she was married before Conor, but her previous husband died mysteriously and she gained control of his fortune. Due to the fortune, the newlyweds built a large mansion onto the tower house. In 1651, Conor O'Brien died in battle and the Red Mary married once again and again and again. It is believed that she had been married a total of 25 times. After the Red Mary died, the castle had various occupants in later years until it fell into ruins at the end of the 18th century and lays abandoned to this day. But it's often visited by ghost hunters and paranormal investigators. It's believed that the Red Mary haunts the castle after her death to this very day. Mary was said to have a foul temper, and if her servants were to displease her, they would be hung out of one of the castle windows, the men by their necks and the women by their hair, until they passed away. It's even said if the maids didn't learn to do whatever the Red Lady said, then she would injure them so heavily they would bleed. After her death, it's not known exactly where she is buried, but many think she is beside the castle, and locals and tourists claim to have seen an eerie womanly figure walking the halls of the castle, often looking out the windows, giving this castle the name of being one of the most haunted Irish castles. In at number 3, we have Salem Mansion. The Salem Mansion is a dark, mysterious and eerie abandoned mansion located in Thessaloniki. The villa was designed in 1878 by Xenophon Paeonides, who was known to be the most famous Greek architect in Thessaloniki. The mansion was bought in 1894 by Emmanuel Salem, who was the most important lawyer in the city and an eminent member of the Jewish community. It remained in the family for over 20 years, and the family gave its famous name the Salem Mansion. During World War I, the villa had changed hands after the Salem family left in 1915, and it became the consulate of the Austro-Hungarian Empire for more than half a century. In 1978, the mansion was damaged extensively by an earthquake that devastated Thessaloniki. To this day, the house still belongs to the Italian state but remains deserted. There have been many plans to restore the villa, but for some reason it is yet to be done. This mansion is a very mysterious place, and even just looking at it, you can sense the fear and horror. There are many legends about the place, and many paranormal investigators visit this infamous place to try and communicate with whatever horrific beings haunt the mansion. Many people speak speak of when they have visited the place that they felt cold air around them, even in the middle of summer, hearing doors close out of nowhere and hearing steps all throughout the house. Locals have mentioned that they stay away from the sinister house due to all the stories and sightings that have happened here. Many thinks it's cursed and stay as far away as they can. In 2013, the producers of the hit TV show American Horror Story used a photo of the Salem Mansion for one of the posters promoting the new season because of its haunting appearance. None of the people working on the series ever mentioned the home being in Greece, and the series of the show, Coven, revolves around a group of witches and is set in New Orleans, so many believe this house is located in the United States. If you're brave enough to visit the Salem Mansion, you have to go all the way to Greece. In at number 2 we have Kontos Mansion. The Kontos Mansion was built in 1900 for Nicholas Kontos, who was the Russian consul for Greece and lived there with his wife and 4 children. The mansion is located beside the ocean in the small village of Ano Lahonia Pelion. Nicholas was one of the most powerful men in central Greece at the time and was widely known in the Pharsala area, and they owned homes in other places like Volos and Athens. The popular urban legend that surrounds the house is that it's haunted after the death of the Kontos family, who was supposedly poisoned by a dead lizard that had fallen into a jug of milk. It was later found out that the children in the family died in their early teens of tuberculosis, but the urban legend is reinforced by the funerary monument in the cemetery of Volos, which presents a table with a decanter and 3 chairs around it, each inscribed with each name of the children and the age they passed, but they all said they all died at a very young age. No one really knows the truth, so the rumours of this cursed mansion continue to this day. Another legend believes that many war soldiers also haunt the mansion. During World War II, the mansion was occupied by the who used it as headquarters where Greek warriors were interrogated and tortured. There were many Greeks who were tortured and executed in the villa's basement. This mysterious mansion has many different stories, and these are reinforced because many other families who lived in the mansion after the Kontos fell into a lot of misfortune, as well as people who worked on the home. Many of the past owners reported hearing spine-chilling screams and cries, causing none of them to stay too long. Some of the workers who helped renovate the villa never saw end results, as many of them unexpectedly died before finishing. Many locals tend to stay away from the haunted mansion, but many tourists come to experience the haunting for themselves. But this mansion is one of many in Greece that have multiple ghost sightings inside and is truly terrifying. To this day, the Kontos Mansion stands empty and abandoned, which makes this place even scarier. And finally, in at number 1 we have Villa Kalogis. The Villa Kalogis is located in the Rafina area of Attica, which was owned by Pericles Kalogis, who was a very wealthy but disturbed man. The villa was named after him, and he stayed in the large mansion with his wife and family. The legend says that in 1910 Pericles took the life of his wife before taking his own life, and some versions tell the story of him taking the life of his whole family before taking his own life in the family home. So there are many stories of Pericles and his family haunting the home, and many have seen family members running around the home and hearing mysterious footsteps. During World War II, the home had been taken over by who used it to imprison and torture Greeks in the cellar, who many believe haunt the cellar to this day. Years later, while attempting to demolish the home, the bulldozer being used suddenly stopped working while approaching the house, and after 2 of the workers died from sudden heart attacks, all thoughts of knocking down the home were abandoned. Another popular legend regarding the haunted mansion is that Anau accepted a bet from his friend that he couldn't last a night in the famous haunted house. Well, he did last the night, but when his friend came in the morning to check on his friend, he found him dead in the home. It's said that nothing at all is able to grow for a few meters around the building. Experts who have investigated this phenomenon found that the atmosphere surrounding the house is uncommonly high in negative ions, something that is thought to be linked to paranormal activity. This haunted villa is among one of the most haunted in all of Greece and should be avoided. In at number 5 we have Lotus Hall. This place may be the most haunted house in all of Ireland, and it is said to be haunted by the devil himself. Lotus Hall is a large country house located on the Hook Peninsula in County Wexford. In 1170, Raymond Le Gros came to the county and built this massive castle, which was known as the Houseland Castle. The Redmond family replaced the original castle with another in about 1350. This second castle was known as the Hall, or Redmond Hall. Later in 1872, John Henry Wellington Graham Loftus undertook an extensive rebuilding of the entire mansion, adding many of the famous elements like the grand staircase, mosaic tiled floor, elaborate parquet flooring, and technical elements that hadn't been seen in houses in Ireland at the time, such as flushing toilets and blown air heating. Charles Tottenham became the lord of the manor in 1752 by marrying the Honourable Anne Loftus, a daughter of the first Viscount Loftus, and they had 6 children. However, his wife became ill and died while the girls were still young. 2 years later, Tottenham married his cousin Jane Cliff, and they lived together, along with one of Charles's daughters in Loftus Hall. One evening, Charles was resting in his home in 1775 with his second wife and daughter from his first marriage, Anne, while the the Loftus family were away on business. During a storm, a ship unexpectedly arrived at the Hook Peninsula, where the mansion was located. A young man was welcomed into the mansion. Anne and the young man became very close. One night the family and the mysterious man were in the games room playing cards, and it was then when Anne noticed the man having a cloven foot. The man went up through the roof, ultimately leading to his demise and leaving behind a large hole in the ceiling which remains today. Soon Anne became mentally ill. It's believed that the family were ashamed of Anne and locked her away in her favourite room, which was known as the Tapestry Room. She refused food and drink and sat with her knees under her chin looking out the Tapestry Room window, waiting for her mysterious stranger to return until she passed away in the Tapestry Room in 1775. It is said that when she died they could not straighten her body as her muscles had seized, and she was buried in the same sitting position in which she had died. After her death, everyone who had lived there says she still haunts the hall to this day. After being purchased by Aidan Quigley in 2011, this building was marketed as a haunted house that hosted guided tours of the house until 2020 when it was put on the market for sale. In at number 4 we have the Abbey of the Black Hag. The old abbey lies on a small valley about 2 miles east of the village of Shannon Golden in the townland of the Old Abbey. One of the earliest nunneries in Ireland, it is first mentioned in 1298 and was founded on land donated by John Fitzthomas of Canello, who had died in 1261. Remains include the abbey church with 2 small spaces adjacent, and one appears to have been a sacristy and a vaulted building to the west. There are also walls and a gate and traces of an orchard, a fish pond and a pigeon house. Modifications to the church in the 15th century saw the inclusion of an east window in the church as well as a doorway in the north. Traces of window decoration, columns and carved tombstones remain. Burials were also located and the church plate was reportedly found in the late 18th century. It is said that the last abbess terrified the local population with her use of the black arts and sexual practices in a room to the south of the church, and is now called the Black Hag Cell. After the closure of the abbey, the hag remained there and continued to perform her unholy acts, and it's believed she lived unusually long, which caused her ancient skin to become darker and darker over time. Another legend is regarding the Earl of Desmond, and that during his escape from one of the many battles between the Geraldines and the Butlers, the Countess was wounded by an arrow. The wound was so serious that the Earl believed the Countess had died and buried her beneath the altar in the main chapel. The Countess awoke to find herself buried alive, and when people would see a ghostly figure they went to her gravesite and they had found her finger bones had been worn out from clawing at the coffin, and it's believed her screams can still be heard to this day. In at number 3 we have the Crum. Located in Northern Ireland, Crumlin Road, Gaol, or so often called the Crum, is reportedly one of the most haunted places in Belfast. This former prison was built in the Victorian era and was designed by Sir Charles Lanyon in 1845. It is their only Victorian era prison remaining in Northern Ireland and was one of the most advanced prisons of its day. This prison held some of the most dangerous and mentally ill people in all of Ireland, and many prisoners passed away while staying here, and they believed to haunt the building to this day. The prison had brutal conditions, and children were even held there as young as 6 for petty crimes like stealing food. This prison held executions, and the first known execution was done in 1854 to a man named Robert Henry O'Neill. It's believed over 20 people, including Robert, had been buried in unmarked graves within the grounds of the Gaol. These executions were a public demonstration, were held in crowds of up to 20,000 people to watch. Later in 1901 there was an execution chamber built, and the most dangerous prisoners were sent to this notorious prison to be executed. After closing its doors in 1996, it is now used for events and conferences, and during the Halloween season it's open to ghost hunting experiences and for paranormal investigators. This infamous prison is featured on the list of the world's most notorious historic prisons, and tourists continue to flock here due to the amount of paranormal activity and ghost sightings over the years. In at number 2 we have Malahide Castle. The Malahide Castle lies in the village of Malahide just north of Dublin and dates back to the 12th century. The estate began in 1185 when Richard Talbot was granted the lands of Malahide, and it was home to the Talbot family for 791 years until 1976. The castle was eventually inherited by the 7th Baron Talbot, and in 1973 it was passed down after his death to Rose, his sister. Then in 1976 the castle and its grounds were sold to the Irish state. Nowadays the castle is used as a concert venue, tourist attraction and banquet events. It also features a popular botanical garden, sports ground, golf course, tennis court and a children's playground. The castle's best known rooms are the Oak Room and the Great Hall, which display Talbot family history and are known to be visited often by paranormal investigators. The tragic story of a murdered jester named Puck is the most notable ghost who haunts the castle. Stories say he had fallen in love with one of the Malahide's prisoners, Lady Eleanor Fitzgerald. Puck was found out when he was stabbed in the heart, ultimately dying, but with his last breath he swore to haunt the castle for all of eternity. Locals and tourists see the ghost of Puck roaming the castle grounds. It's also believed that many members of the Talbot family also haunt the castle. When in the late 1700s, 14 members of the family sat down for breakfast in the Great Hall, and then later that night all 14 people were suspiciously found dead. It is rumoured to be one of the most haunted castles in Ireland. The castle's residents, workers and visitors have all reported similar eerie happenings, and you can learn about all of the different ghost hauntings on the very popular ghost tours, including Puck. And finally, in at number 1 we have Grace Neal's Bar. Not only are castles and buildings haunted in Ireland, but there is an Irish pub by the name of Grace Neal's Bar that is a popular haunted place. This Irish pub is located in County Down and was built in 1611 and is one of the oldest bars in Ireland. Originally this bar was called the King's Arms when it was first established, until it was taken over by Grace Neal. Grace spent years serving drinks to the bar goers. She was known to greet every guest with a kiss on the cheek and a hug, and she was described as having a strong spirit. It's believed by many that her ghost has stuck around the bar ever since her death in 1916. Cold spots are felt around this warm atmosphere, and some have reported seeing a ghostly figure of a Victorian-era woman wandering around the front bar. The current owners of the bar often hear sweeping noises, footsteps, and glasses and cups have fallen suddenly off the shelves for seemingly no reason. Not only is Grace the only spirit haunting the bar, staff members of the bar have regularly seen shadowy figures of men passing by in the upstairs area. Several different ghost hunters have visited the 400-year-old pub in order to try and find answers for the unexplained sighting, including medium Derek Ackera and the most haunted team. One ghost hunter, Mike Hearns, believes he had come across an evil spirit when he was investigating the bar. He stated that the anomaly appeared before him as a ball of light upstairs and was very evil and unpleasant. Spirits suck the energy from people, and he claimed to get very out of breath, and all his energy was drawn out when he was investigating the bar. Grace Neal's Bar is known to be among one of the most haunted bars in the world, and the most haunted in all of Ireland.
Number 5 on this list is the Krakow Horror House. Located in the Wałęczowska district of Krakow, this house has been reportedly haunted since 1990. The good news is you won't be able to miss it, and therefore can avoid it pretty easily. It's said to have a tree growing straight out of the roof, weeds everywhere, has the windows and the doors all boarded up, has a lock on the gate, and has barbed wire on the fence. So even if you did want to go in, it would be pretty freaking hard. This house is said to have been haunted ever since the owner in 1990 hung himself inside. After this happened, weird things began occurring at this home. After the man died, a couple moved into this house, but moved out only a month after living there. One of the crazier things that happened to them was that their car turned on all by itself and drove straight into their garage. A jewelry company tried their luck at this home next and met a similar fate of weirdness. Their jewelry kept getting inexplicably broken inside the locked drawers. Nothing was stolen, just broken or crushed. Finally, an IT company came into the home, but they were met with an onslaught of fires that started from their own computers. Nowadays, this place is totally locked up and can't even be accessed. It's known by all the locals as being one of the most haunted homes in all of Poland. Clearly, the man who took his own life wasn't too fond of others inhabiting his space and did whatever he could to get them to leave. It could be a bunch of weird coincidences, but the things that happened are just simply too weird to be chalked up as that in my opinion. Like, how on earth does your car start by itself and drive straight into your home? It truly does sound like some ghostly intervention to me. If you don't want something weird and dangerous happening to you, then I would highly recommend avoiding this haunted home. Number 4 on this list is the Wieliska salt mine. This salt mine is truly unbelievable and looks like something straight out of a fairy tale. Nearby the Polish city of Krakow, this salt mine is so beautiful it's considered to be a World Heritage Site. This mine was established in the 13th century. It was actually used for mining salt all the way until 2007. The mine descends to a depth of 327 meters and has horizontal passageways that extend a whopping 287 kilometers. This mine has some beautifully designed underground rooms and is a massive tourism spot for people visiting Poland. Many of these tourists aren't aware that there's a legend surrounding these ancient walls though. It all started with a young boy many years ago. This young boy wanted to go and work in the salt mines because his family was very poor and he wanted to help support them. The foreman of the mine at the time would not accept his help because he thought that the boy was too young. After some pleading from the boy, the foreman finally told him that he could work for 1 week, and if he was impressed with his workload, then he could continue on in the mine. The boy happily accepted the challenge, but when he got down there started struggling heavily. That was right up until another man approached this child and told him that he would help the boy in exchange for a portion of his wages. The boy accepted, and with this man's help was able to meet the foreman's expectations. The foreman paid the boy his week's wages, and as agreed, the boy then took his wages and offered a portion to the man who helped him. This man laughed him off though and revealed himself to be the treasurer of the mine, refused to accept the wages, and left the boy to his own devices. Ever since then, this treasurer of the mine has been spotted by workers or visitors throughout the years. He's said to reward good behavior but punish those who are bad. Stealing salt from the mine or anything else will be punished, but hard work and honesty, as exhibited by the boy, is rewarded. In my opinion, this spot is probably safe to visit as long as you behave appropriately when you're down there.
In at number 3 we have Cork District Lunatic Asylum. The Cork District Lunatic Asylum opened in 1789, and by 1845 the Irish Lunatics Asylum Act allowed for appropriating the lunatic asylum in the city of Cork to the purposes of a district lunatic asylum. The legislation provided for 2 new asylums, a criminal one in Dundrum, Dublin, and then a 500-bed asylum in Cork. This building was originally in 3 separate blocks, later to be joined together in the interest of providing more accommodation. To become the longest facade of any building in the country, it opened in 1852. William Saunders Halloran was an Irish psychiatrist who worked at this asylum from the time it opened until his death, and was the author of practical observations on the causes and cure of insanity. This doctor's methods were extreme and torturous. He created something called the Halloran's chair, which rotated hysterical patients up to 100 revolutions per minute. It rarely had the desired effect. Inmates lived out their days in a state of paranoia and despair while admitted at the asylum. The horrors of this place finally ended when the asylum was closed in 1992. It stayed abandoned for many years, and locals and tourists went to visit this scary place. They claim the tortured souls still remain here, and paranormal investigators even visited and claimed to have seen both and heard voices of these tormented souls. Today the building is being converted and renovated into apartments called Atkins Hall. In at number 2 we have the Hellfire Club. The Hellfire Club is located on Mount Pellier Hill in Dublin. The building gets its name because it's believed to be one of the first Freemason lodges in Ireland. Around 1725, William Connolly, who was one of the wealthiest men in Ireland at the time, built this building to be a hunting lodge. Years after the build, the roof was blown off during a storm, and locals believed it was the work of an aggressive spirit seeking vengeance on Connolly for building on their land, and that's when the story started swirling. After Connolly's death, the building was quickly sold and is said to have become a meeting place for the Irish Hellfire Club. The club was founded in 1735 by Richard Parsons, a known dabbler in black magic. The members met at locations across Dublin and were known for their immoral behaviour and debauchery involving alcohol and sex. The secrecy surrounding the club members led to speculation that they were Satanists and devil worshippers. The president of the club was named the King of Hell and dressed like Satan, with horns, wings and hooves. The members were said to set a place at each meeting for the devil in the hopes that he would attend. They were also said to hold black masses in the lodge, during which cats and even servants were sacrificed. Some say the building was deliberately set on fire in order to enhance its hellish atmosphere. The best known Hellfire Club story is the one in which the devil himself appears. A stranger joined the members at a game of cards. At some point, one of the card players dropped a card on the floor. As he bent down to retrieve it, he noticed that the stranger had cloven hooves instead of feet. Another tale concerns a young farmer, curious to find out what went on in the meetings. Climbing up Mount Pellier Hill one night, he was invited by members of the club and allowed to witness the night's activities. He was found the next morning trembling and terrified. Tradition says he spent the rest of his life unable to speak, unable even to remember his name. The Hellfire Club remains burnt out and abandoned on Montpellier Hill looking over Dublin. It is a beautiful sight on a sunny day, but make sure you leave before night. It's a beautiful sight on a sunny day, but make sure you leave before night comes, because you may come into contact with the unusual smells, ghostly apparitions or paranormal sightings. And it's said that satanic rituals are known to be done here. And finally, in at number 1 we have Leap Castle. Of the many haunted places in Ireland, Leap Castle is possibly the most notorious of all, and is one of the most well-known symbols of haunted Ireland. This place is located in Kildare in County Offaly. There are many accounts of when the main tower was constructed, but could go back as far as 1250 CE and was built by the O'Bannon clan. The O'Bannons were the secondary chieftains of the territory and were subject to the ruling O'Carroll's clan. There are many stories of who or what haunts this place. A red lady ghost Ghost is reported to walk the halls holding a dagger, and also 2 little girls named Charlotte and Emily are reported to run up and down the spiral staircase in the mansion. A Red Lady Ghost is reported to walk the halls holding a dagger, and also 2 girls named Charlotte and Emily are reported to run up and down the spiral staircase in the mansion. Emily passed away after she fell from the top of the castle's tower, and Charlotte can still be seen running around after her sister and calling her name. The castle was visited by paranormal investigators from shows like Most Haunted and Scariest Places on Earth. These investigators believe the castle is haunted by a sinister elemental spirit. The creature is described as being about the size of a sheep with a human face, black holes for eyes and nose, and giving off the smell of a rotting corpse. During renovation of the castle in the 1900s, workers found an oubliette behind a wall in the chapel. At the bottom of the shaft were many human skeletons on wooden spikes. When cleaned out, it took 3 cartloads to remove the bones. Today, the dungeon is now covered over in order to keep people away from it. It's believed that the O'Carrolls would drop guests through the trapdoor to be impaled on the spikes 8 feet below and could be haunted by the people killed by the O'Carrolls. The castle describes itself as the world's most haunted house, due to the numerous amounts of spirits located here.
Number 5 on this list is Sisu Hotel. Located in Bucharest, this hotel was initially built over 100 years ago in 1912 and was first called the Palace Hotel. It was called this because it truly was a marvel back then and was one of the most beautiful spots in the country. The architect who built it owned the property until 1948, when it was ultimately taken by the state. This is where it was given the name that it has today. For the next 20 years or so, the hotel thrived and wasn't only just a spot for the super wealthy to vacation, but was also a spot of parliamentary meetings and other things of great importance. In 1970 though, this hotel shut down. It was simply a side effect of the communist wave that was sweeping through this part of the world, and therefore the hotel was neglected for 20 years until finally it reopened in 1990. It wasn't used as a hotel anymore though, but rather as student housing for the students enrolled in the Academy of Film and Theatre. It was during this phase when Sisu Hotel saw the tragedy that haunts it to this day. Nellie Bajan was a young student who was staying here during her time in school. The semester had come to an end though, and it was Christmas time when the incident happened. She was one of the only students who didn't go home for Christmas and instead decided to stay in her dorm. One evening she was walking down the hall, and due to some of the lights being out, she stepped into the elevator shaft where there was no elevator waiting for her. She fell down several stories and landed at the bottom of the shaft, writhing in agony. She didn't die immediately though. In fact, it took her over 3 hours to finally die from her wounds. 3 hours where she was screaming and yelling for help, but nobody could hear her because they were all home for Christmas. Now her spirit haunts this place, and many students have reported hearing cries for help coming from nowhere. Some have seen her ghost standing at the end of the hallway, looking as if she's desperate for someone's attention. The sad thing about this is that if it would have happened at any other time when students were in the building, she likely would have been saved and never would have died at all. Just a horrible tragedy that's left its mark on this hotel for good. Number 4 on this list is the Witch's Pond. So this is a bit of a weird one. The Witch's Pond is a very small collection of water in the Balgal Castle forest that's said to be haunted. A few legends have come from this place. The first one, which I don't actually think is true, but I'm gonna tell you guys anyways, is that Vlad the Impaler was decapitated here. Now it could be possible that this did happen. The truth behind Vlad's death has been debated for centuries, but I find it unlikely that the killers would take him out to this pond in this forest and do it out here. The second legend, which I think is far more likely and probably did actually happen, is that a witch was killed here. An article on the subject writes, as the legend goes, 18th century villagers put a witch to death in the woods near a swampy pond in colonial era cemetery of Aquia Creek. Her name, it's said, was Edith, and her body was tossed into the water. This killing is how the pond got its name, the Witch's Pond. After she was killed, strange occurrences started happening here that couldn't be explained. It's said that the water turns blood red in the springtime, and sometimes people see a witch-like figure hovering over this bloody liquid. In other reports, there's a sacrificial altar that spawned here, and she's standing by it waiting to sacrifice someone. The sound of bodies being thrown into the pond along with a witch's cackle can be heard ringing throughout the forest. Locals avoid this pond, and you should too. Also, if you think about it, it's just a small pond, so I don't really know why you'd be going there anyways. Number 3 on this list is Wiist Forest. Wiist Forest is a big forest that's located near the city of Krakow. This forest was just a normal forest until something extremely horrible happened back in 2001. It's said that 9 students were out at the forest having a bonfire, drinking, and celebrating the start of the school year. Apparently, as they were partying, a man came across the group and told them not to go deeper into the forest. This happened at around 8:30 p.m., so the group, they still had tons of night left. Rather than heed his warning, the students did the exact opposite. They wanted to go check out what was so scary and unsafe about the depths of this forest. They grabbed their things and they went into the woods. And since that moment, none of them have ever been seen again. After the students disappeared, police and investigators searched for a while, but with no success. Many people have speculated upon what happened to those students back in 2001. Is there some type of killer loose in the woods? Are the woods haunted by a ghost? Did the students just get lost in the trees? The most popular legend is about an old village from hundreds of years ago called Mirena. This town eventually burned down, but lots of its inhabitants died in the woods from satanic rituals that were being performed in that area. People think that the spirits of those that died here are now what haunt the space. You can tell that they're around you because a strange green fog can be seen forming in the forest. Definitely not a spot I would recommend going, considering there's a chance that you might not come back out. Number 2 on this list is Agenic Castle. The Agenic Castle is one of the most haunted spots in the country for sure. In fact, many of you were commenting about this place in the last video that I did about Poland. This castle is a medieval castle that's located in south-central Poland. It was initially built in the 14th century but has been rebuilt many times throughout its long history. In the early 17th century, this castle was owned by Stanisław Wierzcicki, and it's the spirit of this man that haunts the walls to this day. The spirit of this guy doesn't manifest itself in a human form though. The ghost at this castle is a black dog that has massive chains weighing down on its neck. Stanislaw was said to have been an extremely cruel man when he was alive. He made a fortune during his life but refused to share any of it with anyone, even his own family. His servants and subjects got the worst though. For his own amusement, he would often take them down into the dungeons of his castle and mercilessly torture them there. It's said that even the devil was repulsed by this man's actions and has condemned his spirit to return from hell every now and again in the form of this dog. Howls can be heard and chains scraping across the ground echo throughout the castle walls. Frankly, I think it's a very fitting end that a man who looked at other humans as dogs is now the spirit of one. Number 1 on this list is the Zofiaka Psychiatric Hospital. This haunted psychiatric hospital is located in Otwock, which is very close to Warsaw. This location is currently abandoned and probably for good reason. It was established in 1907 and was intended to be a psychiatric hospital specifically for Jewish individuals. Prior to World War II, this hospital was considered one of the most prestigious neuropsychiatric centers in all of Poland. As you may expect though, when World War II began and Poland was taken over by the German army, the conditions of this hospital got very bad. The mental institute was still running at the beginning of the German occupation. Its location was inside the Jewish ghetto of Otwock. As I mentioned though, the lifestyle of these Jewish patients, it was horrific. It's estimated that roughly 400 Jewish patients died from starvation and torture in the early goings of the occupation. This all culminated on August 19th, 1942 when a horrible atrocity took place. 100 to 140 of the occupants were rounded up and brought outside the hospital. There, they were all executed on the spot. Any patients who remained were put onto the trains along with all of the other Jewish residents of Otwock and sent to the extermination camp Treblinka. It should also be noted that many of the workers at this institute took their own life before they were taken onto the trains. Nowadays, this hospital is abandoned and doesn't serve any purpose, but locals have said that it's very haunted. People who go past this spot often hear disturbing moans and cries coming from thin air. People have also seen ghostly apparitions walking around the forest that's right next to this building, a forest where many deaths took place. They describe these apparitions as having blurred faces with a weird glow to them. This is just one of the many spots in Poland that has a horrible history due to the events that transpired during German occupation. If you do ever go to this place, then make sure to show some respect. The atrocities that happened here were real, and we can't take them lightly. Number 5 on this list is Mary King's Close. Mary King's Close is known to most as being Scotland's most haunted street. It's a very dark and mysterious looking street. I'm not sure if we have any Harry Potter fans watching, but it reminds me of the dark part of Diagon Alley. Just really strong and creepy vibes. It leads off of Edinburgh's Royal Mile, which is the road coming from Edinburgh Castle. This close was apparently gated off in the past during an outbreak of the plague and was left like this for a long time. Only pretty recently has it been reopened, but ever since it has, the reports of hauntings have run rampant. The most commonly spotted spirit here is that of a young girl. Nobody knows her name or why she's there, but she'll often appear holding a little plush bunny rabbit and run through the close. She's said to be devilishly tricky as well and will often steal tiny things off of your person as you pass by without even realizing. Phones, wallets, rings, necklaces, tiny things of this nature are often reported being lost or stolen after walking through the close. Some people think that when this place got bricked up, she was actually forgotten about in here and then died. I'm not sure how someone could possibly have forgotten a little girl here as they were locking it up, but I suppose anything is possible. Either way, it is deeply haunted now, and if you do go, then make sure you leave all your valuables at home. Number 4 on this list is Stirling Castle. Stirling Castle is one of the most haunted castles in all of Scotland's history and is located on top of Castle Hill. Great Castles writes, "The most famous spirit to call Stirling Castle home is the ghost of the Green Lady. Stirling Castle still serves as the home to a garrison, and one evening she delayed dinner in the officers' mess when she materialized behind the chef who was preparing the meal for the soldiers. Feeling as though he was being watched, he turned around, only to see her green, translucent form standing behind him, at which time he fainted. She simply vanished on this occasion, but her appearances are usually a harbinger of bad things to come. On several occasions, her visits have occurred shortly before fires or other mishaps at the castle. The ghost of a pink lady sometimes can be seen leaving the castle and walking to the neighboring church of the Holy Rood Ladies' Rock. This was an elevated location where the ladies of the court would go to watch knights participate in jousting tournaments. Some believe the Pink Lady is the ghost of the sole survivor of Edward I's siege of the castle in 1304. Having escaped the siege, she keeps returning to the castle to find her slain husband, though her spirit is seen leaving the castle, not entering. This article then goes on to talk about a ghost of a man with a kilt who lives around the dungeons of this castle and occasionally shows himself to the visitors. But clearly the spirits of this castle are pretty fond of bright colors. The Green Lady, the Pink Lady, I'm kind of surprised that we didn't get a few more ghosts together and we can make a whole freaking rainbow. Even though they are bright and colorful, they are still very scary. In fact, there have been reports of people actually dying of sheer fright before, their corpses looking as if they were petrified to death. It's also believed that if you don't die of fright, then seeing these ghosts is a sign of horrible things to come. Either way, I would recommend avoiding this spot altogether. Scotland has a bunch of other non-haunted castles to visit if you need to get your castle fix in. Number 3 on this list is Ulia Hau Castle. Bogdan Hau was a Romanian intellectual who was very wealthy at the end of the 18th century. Bogdan, even though he put lots of effort into his work and business, put the most of his time into his daughter. Ulia Hau was his daughter and in Bogdan's eyes could do no wrong. That's why when she passed very unexpectedly at the age of 19, Bogdan fell into a deep depression. While she was alive, she was rather remarkable. In her early teens, she knew 7 languages and had already graduated several prestigious schools for piano and vocals. She apparently excelled at her schooling as well and was set to have a very fruitful life if she hadn't been taken too early due to tuberculosis. Bogdan, as I mentioned, didn't respond super well to this and reacted by building the Ulia Hau Castle. Little did he know that it was going to be haunted. Apparently he partook in spiritism sessions with people who were trained in reaching out to the dead. In these sessions he would communicate with his daughter's ghost and she would tell him how she wanted her castle to be constructed. This is how it was built, and everything that he decided to do and tell the architect apparently came directly from the ghost of his daughter. Her ghost didn't just leave things be when this castle was finished though. In fact, she fully took up residence here. It's said that the ghost of this girl can be spotted walking throughout the halls of this castle very often. Many people report hearing the sound of a piano playing, assumingly at the hands of this ghost. What's even creepier though is that this piano playing will instantly be followed by the applause of her dead father. Also, this castle has several rooms specifically made for spiritual rituals and also an area to worship Satan. From what I've heard, the ghost here isn't particularly dangerous in nature, but it still sounds like one of the creepier spots in the whole country. Number 2 on this list is Pooner Fortress. This fortress has been riddled with death and destruction ever since it was first built. Even though in the first part of this series we talked about Dracula's castle, this is the castle where Vlad the Impaler, the inspiration for Dracula's character, spent a large part of his time. It's said that he saw the ruins of a fortress here at the beginning of his rule and thought that it would be a great place for a stronghold. He enslaved his enemies and worked them around the clock to revive the fortress to its former glory. Many of them died due to the extensive extensive labor and fatigue, and those who didn't were killed by being impaled. Now, it's said that some of their spirits haunt this place, but they aren't the only ghost that still lingers here. The most notable haunting of this place is actually done by Vlad the Impaler's wife. During Vlad's reign, this fortress fell under siege by his enemies. Vlad was able to escape the castle, but his wife wasn't so lucky. The castle was falling, and rather than get captured by the oncoming army, she decided to fling herself off of the castle walls over top of a cliff. Her body fell far and dropped into a river many hundreds of feet below. It's said that the river ran red with blood, and it was nicknamed the Lady's River following this. Her ghost now forever wanders around this castle, restless. Some say that her soul can never find peace because she could never forgive her husband for abandoning her all those years ago. This is why locals say that she has it out for any married men that visit the castle. Although visiting this castle would definitely make for a fun day trip, it might just not be worth it. Number 1 on this list is Hoybachu Forest. Often referred to as the Bermuda Triangle of Transylvania, this forest is on pretty much everyone's list when it comes to the most haunted forests in the world. It all started when in 1968 a military technician took a photo of the area and captured what looked to be a UFO hovering over top of the woods. An article from My Best Place writes, after this incident, other inexplicable events soon followed, including the disappearance of a shepherd and his 200 sheep which were never found again, and the disappearance of a 5-year-old girl who later reappeared 5 years later wearing the same clothes and without having aged even one day. There have also been many first-hand reports from people who have entered the forest only to come out with burns, severe rashes, headaches, and a high fever which they didn't have before. Some studies have revealed higher than usual radioactivity produced by natural uranium present in the subsoil. The part in that article about burns and rashes and other things is one of the most common reports described by the people who go here. It seems that everyone who enters into these woods leaves with some sort of trauma. Most of that trauma is mental though. Feelings of despair and depression are widely documented from pretty much everyone who steps foot into this forest. All of the numerous reports, the photographs, and the general lore around this place has to make it the most haunted spot in all of Romania. Definitely not a forest that I recommend going to if you're looking to get outdoors.